Initially, this video is actually going to be about like self-optimization and productivity culture, but it took a weird turn, so I just kind of rolled with it. But if you see me make reference to the productivity culture stuff, then that's why. Experience really is the best teacher. So if you want to optimize, the solution is not to focus on optimization, paradoxically. I think the solution is to focus on experience. And even then, I think optimization is a side thing. It's, life is kind of like a project, and optimization is trying to make things go more smoothly for yourself, right? But it's not the main goal, right? So, for example, something that I and teenage girls have in common as a teenage boy myself is the tendency to, after some experience, some like emotional, or even mildly emotional experience, afterwards to ruminate a little bit on it. And that is the price of being metacognitive before the age of 25. And what I mean is your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that does higher order thinking and long-term planning, impulse control, is not done developing until you turn about 25. And so what does this mean for you? If you are somebody who is under the age of 25 and does like very good at self-reflecting and that sort of thing, you are using your prefrontal cortex, right? But those connections are not, optimal, kind of ironic. And so it ends up being very metabolically expensive. You will have a little bit of, after a long conversation, you might feel tired after like a big emotional burden, right? Because you think about it afterwards. And as you grow older, from my understanding, it gets metabolically less expensive. So you're spending like half the glucose on, one interaction. And so what's my point? Well, this tendency to ruminate, after something happens, for example, like you go out and somebody says something a little bit rude and you overthink it, this is true, I guess, for any overthinker. Ask yourself, why are you thinking about it? Seriously. And seriously consider it. Don't just take that as a rhetorical question. I mean, why are you thinking about it? Because you could have a very good reason for it. It could be that maybe you made some social error and you don't want to make that social error in the future. But if you know the error you made, then ask yourself, is intellectualizing this, is turning this emotion into thought and thinking about it instead of letting yourself feel the emotion, is it worth it? Is this something that, because a lot of times, intellectualizing an emotion, turning it into thought and trying to pick it apart and understand it can be very good. It can be very useful for more complicated things like trauma or things that, have a lot of moving parts to them. But in a lot of cases, the lesson to be learned from some experience is, and this now goes to a lot of men, with suppressing one's emotions, a lot of times the lesson to be learned is not from understanding the experience, but from the emotion itself. For example, you end a situationship or relationship or whatever, and you feel grief. And it's because you think that you didn't put as much effort as you liked into the relationship, and now it's gone. And you feel regret. And so the lesson to be learned for your nervous system is that regret. It's the feeling itself, right? That is what teaches you. That's what I mean when I say experience is the best teacher. But if you are to suppress your emotions, there's no such thing as that, by the way. There's no such thing as truly suppressing one's emotions. It just comes out in other ways. for a lot of people with more complicated trauma, that can express as like literal somatic symptoms. So like, back pain, neck pain, like physical pain. And if your nervous system never gets to fully metabolize it, then you're never going to really learn. And that's why you may keep making the same mistakes. So, you have two opposite ends of the spectrum that basically do the same thing. On one end, ruminating functionally in a lot of ways is similar to suppressing one's emotions, because it in a lot of ways it is a defense mechanism. It is not feeling your feelings, right? If you do truly want to think about them, then first let yourself feel it. First let yourself feel it until it passes. And then after it passes, then think about it. I also don't mean this in like a self-help or like self-care way, where it's like, everybody's pain is valid, which is true, but that's not my point. My point is that if you think of it like evolutionarily, for example, if you think of like, being a hunter-gatherer in the woods, what your brain was kind of primed for. For example, if you hear a rustle in the bushes, you will feel stressed because, it might be, although it might be a small rodent, it could be a predator. And so your flight or fight response activates and you run away, right? You run back to safety, out of the forest. But you never investigated, right? You don't know whether or not it is a rat, right? Or if it is like a predator. That information is not known. There's a lot of uncertainty, and the brain fears uncertainty. So that emotion is never contextualized by the prefrontal cortex, the higher order thinking part of your brain. It is never integrated because you don't know, there's uncertainty. So think of your emotions in that context, right? If you never sit with them, your brain will know that it is it's uncontextualized, right? Your nervous system doesn't know what to do with it. And so in a lot of ways, a lot of times that manifests as irritability for no reason, that manifests as frustration, anger, it manifests as somatic symptoms like back pain. A lot of times in younger men, if you feel needlessly irritable, it could be hormones, it could be that, but it also could be that you're suppressing your emotions. So seriously, take some time to feel them. And it is a deeply, deeply uncomfortable thing. Do know that. But a lot of times some short-term pain is necessary for some long-term growth, some short-term discomfort. You do not want to be in a state of hypervigilance, I assure you. And when I say, feel your feelings, a lot of people will take that, and what they'll do is, something will happen, and maybe they'll sit with it, but they'll also interpret it as it's happening, and they'll evaluate it, and they'll think about it. That's not what I'm saying. In fact, that is intellectualizing in a way. You should not in general, obviously it's context dependent, so take this with a grain of salt, but if you are feeling some strong, emotion, it's important to name it. It's important to name it, but it's also important not to spiral over it and not to be ruminate on it, especially if it's a more minor one. You might want to let it out. You might want to tell a friend, but don't, drag it out. Let it take its course and let your brain contextualize it. There is a reason why naming your emotion can be very useful, and that is because it helps your brain contextualize it. It gives it a narrative. If you think back to the, rodent in the bushes, if you don't tell your brain, if you don't say out loud or consciously, oh, it was a rodent in the woods, your prefrontal cortex, it was a rodent in the bush, your prefrontal cortex will not contextualize it. It will never be integrated. So even something as simple as that counts. And I say that a little bit of boredom is good. A little bit of boredom is good. Too much boredom can lead to a lack of motivation, but you have this part of your brain called the default mode network. It's like a network more than a part, but it is involved in what you are doing when you're not doing anything. So when you're daydreaming, when you are ruminating, all that stuff. And there is some link between the default mode network and creativity. Why would this be? Well, when you're deprived of external stimuli, you will create your own. And if you're deprived of external stimuli for too long, you will very much create your own in what are called hallucinations. That's why a lot of times people in solitary confinement will hallucinate, right? They'll have auditory and visual hallucinations. But a little bit of boredom, you won't get complete hallucinations, you'll just get a boost in creativity, right? More connections between things. Feeling your emotions and being bored are very deeply human things. And it's important to be human. It's important to experience and live life. Because if you're not experiencing, then what are you doing? Are you preparing for experience? Are you optimizing your experience? Are you sanitizing your experience? Whatever it is, well, it may be helpful in small doses. Too much is never a good thing, of anything. And one last point. The other day, maybe a couple months ago now, I was in the Change My View subreddit, which is, if you don't know, basically self-explanatory. People wrote opinions and they asked people to change their mind. It's a very healthy exercise to do. And somebody basically made a post about how nobody should drink alcohol because it's dangerous, it is unhealthy, and it's, in his view, poisonous. And he made a very compelling argument for such. And I noted that, well, his argument was right. It was solid, it was sound. The real world is not solid nor sound. A lot of times people will talk about facts over feelings and they're like a cold, hard, logical guy. That's not what you want to be, is it? Do you really want to only be so limited to be able to think with only logic? Right? Empathy, in a way, is its own type of reasoning. It is, obviously it's more intuitive, but it is part of the human experience, feeling empathy. A crucial part at that. And so, when we think about alcohol, we know it's dangerous, right? In no way am I advocating for addiction or anything like that. However, our goal is not to sanitize life until every last bit is clean, right? If that was true, we wouldn't go outside. We wouldn't, our experience would be incredibly sterile. We wouldn't go in the ocean because, it's unsafe, right? You could get smashed by a wave. And yet we go in the ocean, right? We go outside, even though you might get hit by a car or something. We go in car rides. We take public transportation. We go in alleyways sometimes. Because that is, I think, what it means to be human. This whole experience is deeply contradictory. And sometimes it is important to be able to sit in that contradiction and just, laugh in the face of it. My name is Mike Azarin, and I appreciate you watching this.